About 4 months ago, I wrote this. When I show you my Steam library, you may find the most interesting to be the fact I spent more than 100 hours in this war of mine. I know this because the number seems to baffle the public. Now altogether there is not much to say about this game, aside from the fact it takes place in a war-torn fictional city and your goal is to take care of a group of survivors struggling to put food on the table every day. It's worth noting that 11-bit Studio, who made this game, has also allocated over $800,000 for the Red Cross in 2022 to help Ukraine. The game's core loop consists of taking care of your people inside an almost ruined house during the day and sending someone to scavenge the neighborhood at night for any goods you can find. Along this scavenging goes interactions with other people, some hostile, some friendly. There is many different scenarios you can choose from, and almost every scenario takes approximately 40 days until you either find a way out of the city or the war ends. The core loop I talked about does have a certain qualities to it that I want to focus on today. You prepare yourself during the day, equip weapon and ammunition if you have it, if your goal is to trade for food or medication. To make it short, at night you take to the city and try your best to collect items, and killing if you must to get back safe. Sounds kind of like your traditional extraction shooter, doesn't it? What I find so curious about games like Escape from Tarkov, Marauders, or even DMZ, the Call of Duty Warzone mode, is that these games have you behave in complete opposition to the other popular brands like League of Legends. This may sound like a ridiculous comparison, but everything you do inside a game of League of Legends is wiped clean once you finish the game. You earn gold and buy items. You slay enemies and mobs to gain a number of advantages, but once you win or lose, you go back to the client and all you really gain from the 30 minutes is experience points and maybe a vanity minigame. So these games have a certain correlation. The stakes in extraction shooters are not only higher, but the less you gain upon death, for example, the more you subconsciously try to compensate by playing again. Similarly with League of Legends or any other MOBA game, except your progression in a game like Tarkov is much more individual. Nobody on the map wants the exact same things. Everyone is willing to walk over each other to achieve another checkmark with their vendors. Meanwhile, playing a MOBA is fundamentally about cooperation with your team, as everyone wants to achieve the same thing, a victory. You could also compare that mentality to games like Counter-Strike or Valorant. Yet, big part of extraction shooters is very often getting a large team and work in cooperation with others. So the enigma that I try to tackle often when I play DMZ, or watching others play different EX shooters, is just what exactly is the driving force. As I mentioned before, these games are largely about individualism. Most Tarkov players enjoy the realism and weapon building, and that you can take out the weapon out against other weapons. Kind of like a game of Pokemon with weapons that exists already. The separating factor in EX shooters is stakes. You die on the map and you lose progress and your weapon, your gear. Everything about what you were capable of was reset. Every step forward can be 2 leaps back if you aren't careful. So the ultimate trap and joy of these games is very similar to This War of Mine. Desperation of war can be easily expressed by giving certain specific goals. The same goals to individuals, but just barely enough resources on the given map so that a fight over these resources will occur, and to most players violence will be justified. The only progress your gameplay has the potential of having is either by robbing other players of the same opportunities or giving up on them yourself. It's the Russian roulette, except everyone is pointing the gun at others instead of their own heads. Every video game, multiplayer or not, has a peak point of satisfaction. If the satisfaction factor is not high enough, these games tend to wither and die. So what I find immensely interesting is that improvement is overshadowed by what you could call a greed in these extraction games. The point where your desires or goals are fulfilled is not dependent on other players failing the same goals, though it's precisely the fact it can be denied by other players that makes conflict not only justified but often viewed as necessary, which is the precise tipping point for a civilian to take active part in a war. So this was a video and a script that I wrote. Yeah, it's been maybe 5 or 4 months, and the reason for it was actually something that I feel like doesn't have anything to do even with the topic, at least maybe loosely at best, and that is that the Cycle Frontier, which is an extraction shooter game, was at that moment, I think, I'm not sure, but I do think so, about to or already cancelled, already done. They have, as far as I know, uh, taken it off Steam, and I think the servers don't work. I can understand why, as I was definitely one of the people who not only played, like, I think I was close to 500 hours in that game, and maybe 300 of them was like in the beta, the closed beta that not everybody could access to. I really enjoyed that game, and I really enjoy extraction shooters. I enjoyed the idea of it, and I think that's the most interesting part about like what I was talking about in that video I just showed you, is that there is just so many variables, there is just so many things that change the way you play a game depending on your goal, and it's so saturated in an extraction shooter. When you play a regular shooter game, say you play Battlefield, you play Call of Duty, or you even play Counter-Strike or Valorant, these are all different types of the same genre, right? But what's so interesting about extraction shooter is that it's not just that it doesn't have to be a first-person shooter. The whole point, the whole idea of an extraction shooter is that have to you have to overcome the idea that everybody is out to get you, and you have to focus yourself much more on the idea that even if they are all out to get you, you still need to prevail, you still need to take what you think you need versus what you think you are willing to lose. Put that in your backpack, get into the map, and hopefully do your best not to only not to die, but also to accomplish something on that map. And I think big part of what makes these games so unique and why extraction shooter became a genre of a video game is that at its core, I think extraction shooters are basically gambling. It's basically gambling addiction, except that in most shooters I've seen that work this way, including Escape from Tarkov, these the gambling lies in items that you have already acquired yourself in the game, not real life money. And that is, I think, not only the core loop of the game, but also this ingenious idea that creates this unexpected sort of mental bridge, mental loop, I guess, where normal video games, like I said, when you, for example, when you play Call of Duty, the your progress never fades away, never goes away. Your progress can either hold at the max level, meaning when you unlock all the levels, unlock all the weapons, right? It either halts at the max level, or it grows. It never goes back down, right? But in extraction shooters, not only that you can lose your items that you infill into the map with, but there's also the regular vibes. At least most extraction shooters do have them, different ones have them at different intervals. And I was giving a lot of thought recently about why did the cycle fail, because I have really liked that game. I really played a lot of it, and like I said, like at around more than 400 hours. And I have made a lot of different posts, not on YouTube, but different websites, about my conclusions about the game. I've really liked it. I really enjoyed it. I wished that it would become this part of the economy, or the ecosystem is more like it. Basically, you have now escaped from Tarkov. You have Marauders. I don't know how Marauders are now coping. I didn't hear about the game for a very long time now. I'm not sure if it's still active, but Marauders used to be a thing. You have Hunt Showdown, right? Which is another game that's like, is it made by Crytek? I'm not sure, but it's like a game that's like existing in its own bubble. It doesn't go away. It keeps having its own platform, its own player base, even though you don't maybe hear about it as much. It exists. And there's few games out there in general that are like that, that like no matter how relevant or irrelevant they become over time, they still have player bases. But Cycle just couldn't make the cut, even though I remember the biggest part of the biggest reason I think maybe I went from playing Cycle every day. It was like, I don't know, like 5 or 4 hours every single day. I played that game for months, and at some point I just went to DMZ, which, like I already explained in the video, is the Warzone mode, where basically the only difference between Warzone and DMZ is that you have the exfil helicopter. That's obviously a little bit of a Candice, like it's not just that, but it's you get the idea of what I mean here. And the thing is that every video game has cheaters in it, right? And that was at some point incredibly huge problem for Cycle. And every game has it. Every game has problems like that. It's just the nature of like you are putting. It's kind of like when you are making a YouTube channel and you're making YouTube videos. You usually end up being on one side where nobody watches you, or on the other where all of a sudden a lot of people watch you but give you just this brutal amount of criticism, often warranted, but very often also like just gloves off completely, right? So it's like either you can't cope with being called out for things, or you can cope with the fact that you are not gonna get viewed, right? So with multiplayer video games, especially with games that have high stakes, right? Like when you play Valorant or CS:GO or Counter-Strike 2 now, um, you have to cope with the idea that either you play the game and everything is gonna be normal, or you play the game, you get a cheater, and the game either forfeits, as it's in Valorant, which means that you don't lose anything, which is great if it works. But if it doesn't, you can get a cheater on the enemy team and you lose, your progress or your rank for basically no reason, for unfair reasons. So that's how cheaters just work. It's just in the games like these, it's always gonna be a problem, no matter what you do. It's never gonna like not be a problem. And I remember that the one thing about Cycle that did suck a lot was that cheating habit. It's just like I didn't experience them myself a whole lot, but I like to play that game differently. A lot of people I know like to play the game, in a high stakes, just high-end gear. Most people probably like to do that. My go-to when it comes to extraction shooters is to go these budget runs where you don't equip much, because I like to bet a little and win a lot. That's kinda, I don't know, I do think that's most people, but for me it's just like I don't want the pressure of uh, just having so much on me that I can't afford to take risks. That's just my thing. I would rather go into the map with nothing, find things, and use the things I found to fight off enemies. That's just something, I don't know. Maybe I'm not the right person to play EX shooters, but that was just how I played them. So for me, when I did die to a cheater, it wasn't always that heartbreaking. It was always bad, right? It always sucks, but it was never like for some people trying to get that one quest, that final one thing, right? That will complete the game for you. You take out your best weapons, you are very strong, and then cheater just one taps you from somewhere, right? That sucks. That's just like, there's no way around it. It's just like that, and it's a problem that doesn't go away. Doesn't matter what you do. And I have to say, Jaeger, who made the game, who made the cycle, they did a lot of good work fighting cheaters. They did a lot of different ways of, defending the players. There was this system that I don't think I have seen a video game done before, uh, where they basically build up reputation, like hidden score, something like MMR in League of Legends, and they give you a score over time with how much you play the game and how much obviously you don't do things like cheating. And the accounts that were fresh, right, that were new, or they didn't have a lot of reputation for reasons, they would get team up with other accounts that don't have enough reputation. And in turn, obviously, the people who have enough reputation would team up with other people that have enough reputation. So this created these, I think, bubbles where I was in the game since beta. I played 300 hours or 100 hours of the beta of the game. So I think I had my reputation well above most people who played the game, which means I rarely found cheaters. I still see them, I still remember them, but it was very rare for me. And I imagine people who found the game just like, one day they realized, oh, this game looks cool, I will try it. These people automatically got assigned with people that cheat a lot, that didn't get caught yet, right? And that creates this sort of bottleneck or gatekeep, I guess, if you want to call it that, where the new players basically were turned off completely by the game because it was unplayable, whereas the player base that was already established was fine and didn't really have much to complain about. And I think that killed the game. Ultimately, was that the game couldn't gain new players because the new players were always in the cesspool of the cheaters. And yeah, that sucked. But yeah, I talked about this war of mine, and I wanna kind of go back to that because, like I said, I do think this game shares uh, very much with what extraction shooters promise. I recommend you playing the game. It's not, obviously it's not first person shooter, it's not multiplayer, it's just like a strategy game basically. Well, you have seen the gameplay a little bit, so you just kind of get put into this very dreadful situation already. You can choose the scenarios, like I said. Usually it's one or, well, it's usually actually two or more people, and they have to kind of take care of each other. They have to take care of themselves, and like I said, the core loop of the game is that you prepare yourself during the day, and you you have to prepare yourself for the night when you have to go out, or you don't have to technically. You can skip a night, but obviously every time you do that, you just burn through your supplies that you have already instead of gaining them. And that is actually something I didn't see extraction shooter do yet. That is absolutely something, in my opinion, that could be interesting. It could also be pretty awful, I don't know, but I do feel like this is definitely one of those games that if you enjoy extraction shooters and you know, maybe you just don't want to play multiplayer for a bit. I've seen a lot of people look for alternatives, specifically Escape from Tarkov, but just single player. I think you can explore the maps on your own, like in offline mode. At least when I played Tarkov for the last time, which is a couple of years, you were able to just spawn in the map offline and explore it, which is great. So maybe if that's enough, but I'm talking more about like actual story and doing the same thing that you do in the multiplayer just on your own. A lot of people look for that experience, and there is very little amount of games that do it. There are some. One of them is This.War.of.Mine, I think, but not nearly enough. And I do think that extraction shooters in general are not mainstream enough yet, which is baffling because despite the fact there's so many problems with Escape from Tarkov, despite the fact there's so many problems with any other EX shooter, it's still very vastly popular. And not to, you know, throw shade at anybody, but even though Jaeger kind of just blew it and didn't take off, as I think they should have, there's not nearly enough companies, big companies, that do what, for example, Activision did, which is, even though they didn't care for the mode, they didn't care if it will take off, they still made it just to satisfy some portion of player base that could want to try it. And I do think that if Battlefield did it, if even games like Valorant did it, or Counter-Strike, uh, or Apex, if these massively successful games these days would have done some variation of EX shooter, just to give an alternative look at how the game can be perceived and how you can change from this playstyle that suits, you know, these kind of games where you just rush into one spot where you know these players will be. If you change people's perspective on the video game, and instead of having that kind of attitude, you have the attitude of, I don't care if people will be there, I hope they are not gonna be there so I can do this and that, X, Y, and Z, so I can progress my own account. I can progress something I'm trying to do for myself, not rank up, but actually improve my character in a way. Uh, then that would be great. Because usually how these games work is that at the start you really want to either kill somebody to take their gear to make your start easier, or you don't want to have any any conflict at all with anybody. You just want to go from A to B, do the thing that you are supposed to do at B, and then go to C and extract. That's how the very beginning of every extraction shooter feels like. You just kind of drop into the map because you don't know the map at all. You navigate somehow. If you are lucky enough to not die, you don't die, but still, even if you don't die, it's not over. Eh? You still need to find the very strangely and vaguely described corner of the huge map, and you need to then do the thing that hopefully you will know how to do. And once you hopefully do it right, then you need to find a different corner of the map where is the extraction for you. Then you need to call into extraction, which means that automatically brings attention to you, and then hopefully you can make it inside that thing and get out, right? Different games do it differently. Tarkov does it very basically just stand in one place and wait a certain amount of time. Cycle had it that you need to call in a ship, the ship needs to show up so everybody can really see it because it's in the air, right? It descends, it all takes some time, right? Then you need to get into the ship, and once you are in there, some time spends, then you are safe, you're out. DMZ has it like that too. Get into an exfil helicopter, takes off, after a while you're out. So definitely different approaches. It's not as simple as I feel like when you look at games like, or games, when you look at the game like Valorant, I feel like while I actually prefer Valorant personally, I would never install it or play it because of the anti-cheat, because I just am too worried for my hardware to do that to my computer. But if I had to choose between Counter-Strike or Valorant, I think I would choose Valorant because I just like Valorant better in for many reasons. But when you look at games like that, Valorant is basically copy and paste Counter-Strike, which I'm sure will, like, as a statement, that will probably piss off a lot of people who play Counter-Strike because it's just like you have abilities and Counter-Strike is more raw or more pure shooter. I don't know what Counter-Strike people say about Valorant at all, but I just imagine that most of them either they play Valorant and Counter-Strike, so they don't have like strong opinions of hate, I guess, or they play one or the other, so they hate the one or the other. That's what I imagine. I don't know that, but I would imagine that. So I do think when you look objectively at each game, it's obvious that Riot just wanted to sort of copy what CSGO was doing at the time, which was no secret. They wanted to branch out. Their scene was so far just League of Legends, and they made absolute, they made kings of them of the genre, which is like the most played esport video game in existence, basically. And they wanted to branch out, so they did the next big thing, which is shooter. What kind of shooter? Well, what kind of shooter is the most popular shooter in existence today? Counter-Strike. We will make our own version of Counter-Strike, which is Valorant. But when you look at extraction shooters, there is so many variations. There is a literal video game like this. There's This.War.of.Mine, which is not shooter, it's not multiplayer, and yet it does deliver very much the exact same experience as an extraction shooter would do. You look at Escape from Tarkov and DMZ, and while the games are technically the same genre, they couldn't be more further apart from how they work, how everything works in games like that. There's in their single bubbles, like in Tarkov, you have to be incredibly careful, and everybody can die in one bullet. In DMZ, it's more like you are playing. What are those, like Fortnite? What are those games called? I forgot already. Um, Battle Royale. There you go. I lost the words because I didn't play these games for so long now. But yeah, like Battle Royale, like Warzone is Battle Royale, right? And that came to be literally just because before Warzone even happened, before that started existing, Fortnite was, or still is, I guess, but was insanely popular, biggest video game probably in existence, in that genre at least. And Activision said, well, we need to copy that, for if no further reason than just because of the money alone. It needs to be free to play, it needs to be battle royale, and they did that. And then extraction shooters started happening, so obviously Activision said, well, we fucking need to copy that too, even if we don't care about it. And it shows. I made a video when first DMZ came out. I was like, I was blown away because I really liked it. I really liked a lot of things about DMZ. I still do. But back then it was obvious that they didn't really care about the mode, they cared about having it. They wanted that big chunk of player bases that don't care for battle royales anymore, but still would probably pay money for a video game if it was a part of another video game that they like. So they made DMZ. They made extraction shooter because the average demographic for extraction shooter is actually pretty high in age. Like, I'm 28, and I think most people are between 25 and like 35 or something like that when they play an extraction shooter. So these people have money, these people have jobs, and they knew that. So they have to make that because they knew, well, if they play DMZ, maybe, we will get them into this menu where there's also our other games. And maybe they will be bored one day and say, I don't feel like playing DMZ today, but I might give it a shot if it wasn't just about infilling and exfilling, maybe something faster paced, which is literally what either Warzone is, which is free, but you can also play multiplayer, classic multiplayer Call of Duty, which is paid. Yeah, so I do feel like games like this War of Mine never really got recognized for what it was doing. I didn't play the game for a while now, but it occurred to me just the other day because I was thinking about intensely for a long time now. I was thinking about what is it? What is extraction shooters? Why are they the way they are? Because they are fascinating in many aspects. Like as a shooter, as it doesn't have to be shooter obviously, but as this genre of you only own what you own, and if you want to have anything more than what you have right now, or if you want to progress in the progression of the game, you need to gamble what you have right now. Which is concept that like is obvious, but it's still to this day, even though it's popular right now, it's tough to replicate for a lot of companies. It's tough to do it right. And that's not even to say Tarkov does it right, as one of the very first extraction shooters, if not very, like, actually first extraction shooters in existence. Like, even they struggled to do it right, but to do something right when nobody else have done it before, it's not only probably just impossible, but also, if you are the only one doing it, you are automatically probably just doing it right. Aren't you? I'm not sure. That's a very philosophical question, I think, but it gave birth to this ideology, right? That you basically have to start thinking about actually having useful fear in you when you play the game. And that's an interaction of something that never existed before when you look at any video game. When you look at, like I said, Counter-Strike, when you look at Apex, Fortnite, when you look at any game, there's no introduction of fear. Yeah, but even when you play horror games that are multiplayer, like what is that game called? I can't remember the name. What's that game called? Dead by Daylight, right? That's like a horror. That's literally like even it has regular promotions, right? With an actual horror franchises. That's a game that is basically um, this hunter or huntee. I don't know how. I don't know. I don't know what's the genre of that game actually. To be honest, I don't know what it's called, but I know it's like a horror adjacent type of genre where either you play in first person and you're hunting other players, or you're one of like five, I guess, or I think it's like five other players that are playing in third person, and you need to accomplish a certain amount of goal. Doesn't matter what it is, but you know, for the sake of discussion, you need to do a certain goals inside the map. Avoid the monster, which is another player that their goal obviously is to hunt you and kill you. And within those parameters, even though I'm sure if for like a first time players it can be very scary to play that game, I think that over time when you get better at the game, you will realize that you are not scared. This is just a regular like game like any other video game. Like the fear that you felt maybe at the start was not from losing something when you don't finish or when you do die, but from just fear as it is. Like horror movies do jump scares or show you like corpses or whatever, you know, just generate fear just for the sake of generating it, which I think Dead by Daylight definitely does accomplish. But the more you play, the less obviously you'll be scared of it because you know it already. You expect the things that are happening because most multiplayer games need to be consistent with goals and accomplishments in order for them to work properly. And it's so curious that when you look at something like extraction shooter, that's the opposite of it. You can never expect what will actually happen. New scenarios, new stories, happen every day. It's kind of like Daisy in a sense. I've never played that, but I mean, I think I've played it like once or twice before, but there's another like, or Rust. I think Rust would be a good example of this. It's like every time you play that game, something's a bit different, a little bit different. The difference in these games is obviously that you don't extract, you don't have to actually survive, but if you don't survive, everything's over and you start again. So in a sense, it's similar. Yeah, I just think like on top of the message that this game kind of sends, right? Because this was, I don't know when it was actually released, but I know at the time there's always a war somewhere in the world, and I think they did a really good job at explaining that it's no excuse to say that we remember this one big war and that war is over. I know that I would never be able to tell somebody like no war is ever over. There's no scenario, no time when we stop doing it. I wanna believe in it, but at the same time, there's no actual evidence of that. As a species, we have never stopped fighting each other. So it's pretty good estimate that until we reach a serious common ground within all groups of humans, there's always gonna be fights, there's always gonna be wars and conflict, and I think this game shows well that you are very likely to be in a scenario like this one day. I know not that's not how I meant it, but I meant if you will be so unfortunate as to be inside a war zone one day, because that's not that crazy of an idea as it might sound to somebody. Like, it can happen, especially today. Basically, if any country drops, even by accident, a nuclear warhead on your country will be automatically a war zone, at least for some time. And if it wasn't unintentional, if it wasn't accident, and if another country is actually invading your home, right, then you either are lucky enough to escape, to evacuate, but very many people don't have that fortune, or they choose to not do it for the sake of their country, their homes, just like most Ukrainians did. Um, and in that case, you will find yourself in spot that this game describes, where obviously it's not gonna be as easy as like, oh, I will get a backpack and rob the neighbors. But I do feel like if you don't overcome the idea that like now we are in the war state, we are not just regular people anymore. So being like scavenger out there, having to actually maybe even kill somebody, because if you don't, then you have a child at home, you have a sick grandpa at home, and if you don't save them, then you probably just kill yourself. So it's either 3 people die, or this one person that doesn't want to give you medication because their children are gonna die if they don't have it. Like that kind of, it's crazy to think about. I think a lot of people avoid thinking about stuff like this, very reasonably so. Like, I think nobody should have to, but the reality is that it's strangely healthy to think about it. Even if you are even I lived at peacetime, at least in Europe, right? I lived in time of peace my whole life. I have no clue how it looks like if I would one day open my window and there's tanks out there or something like that. I have no idea how that looks like. I hope and wish and pray that I don't, and I hope that nobody in the next generations after me don't either, right? I think any sane person would wish that. The first thing you should wish for is good health, and Jesus Christ, please don't do wars around me or my children, right? But that's not kind of the world, right, that we live in, not at all. So like when you sit there, right, when you sit there at home and you are kind of like just thinking about stuff, whatever you want to think about, the latest show you watched, maybe you want to sit behind the computer for a couple of hours and play a video game, I do think that this game, this war of mine, is a very good example of like giving you very satisfying gameplay, because at the end of the day it's a video game, and I do think that they do a very good job at kind of making you understand not only what, like I said, a lot of EX shooters do, which is you need to get out there and put yourself in possible death scenarios in order to be able to live another day. But not only that, this game, like I said, I played 100 hours of it, so I think I went through most of the things it has to offer. Not all of them, but most of them. And there's a lot of things about this game that, you know, when you actually go through the stories of these people, there's a lot of dialogue going on, and you realize that, like, what's gonna happen, like, like, if I were to talk to right now, whoever is listening, right, like, you live next to a neighbor, probably, you probably will have a neighbor unless you are living on an island or something. Like, if war actually breaks out one day, that neighbor will be, you know, eventually will be your source of whatever you need. If it's water, supplies of any kind, medication, whatever, right? That person and their household will become your resource. But obviously, they probably will not be willing to just give to you anything. Maybe they will be willing to trade, maybe they will be willing to, you know, to kind of live together, because together you will be stronger as a force. But at the end of the day, that only means that you will just gain more stomachs to feed, right? And at that point, you will realize that eventually these people will be just an obstacle to your family or to your own life, even. And I mean, I don't even want to think about it that way, right? It's just complete madness, I think. It's like what war makes you do, what war makes you think about. But the reality is, it will kind of put you into this state of survival. It will not, like, civilization crumbles into pieces when something like this happens. It has to, because civilized people don't wage wars on each other. They don't, you know, do hate crimes and stuff like that. But the sad reality is we still do it. So one day, if you are so unlucky or unfortunate to be in that scenario, you need to understand that your humanity is not gonna save your life anymore. It's gonna be as cruel as taking food away from people that you knew as long as you lived in that house. Probably killing them, or at least killing them faster than they would die, in order for you to live a little bit longer. And in this game, the key or the point of why you are actually doing that to other people is that, well, we all need to wait out the war in order to survive, right? Like, eventually the war will end and somebody will come over and save us. But up until that moment, we will need to live day to day. And the fact is, if everybody pulled in the city and they all gave their food and everything else, right, to me alone, then I would have like 100% chance of surviving it probably. But this, obviously the reality is that nobody's gonna do that. So what are you gonna do then? Are you gonna take it, or are you just gonna, like, maybe? So I'm sure a lot of people would consider, you know, suicide at that point, because they don't feel like their life is worth others. But really, your human brain will not think that way, at least most of the time. Your human brain will be like, my life is worth yours and more, because that's how your survival instinct, a healthy person's survival instinct, works. I feel like this game can teach you so much more than it looks like, because when you look at a trailer, when you look at somebody else playing the game, I feel like when you watch somebody else play this game, one of the first things is that they will, like, let's plays, or people on YouTube who played the game. Maybe you already watched somebody play this game or played through it completely. I feel like that just removes too much from this game. There's a lot of games that work very well when you watch somebody else play it, but this is one of those games where, like, you can totally experience the game well enough through somebody else's eyes, but how are you experiencing games like Escape from Tarkov when you are just watching somebody else play it? There's entire division of there's entire sort of like folder of different emotions and things you need to feel, and you only feel them if you actually play the game yourself. You need to feel these things. Fear is one of those things. The other one is fear kind of makes you alert when you are in that scenario, but at some point when you actually face the demon, which is usually another person trying to save themselves, something else kicks in. It has to be this adrenaline rush. It needs to be this, I fear you, but I fear not succeeding more. I fear death more, which means I need to try to kill you. Even if I don't believe that I can do it, I need to try it. Because that's just my genetics, right? And you can't experience something like that when you just watch somebody else play the game. Especially another game like this. It needs to come from certain emotional attachment. Not a lot of people can do that, especially these days, not for games. Um, a lot of people can do it when they watch like war movies or even shows these days, but I think a lot of people completely miss the beat and the ideology of a game like this, where the game does much better, much more thorough job, much more complete job at showing and explaining that while obviously it's not an exact replica of the experience you will get when you are stuck in a situation like this, but it definitely gives you that feeling that, like, I don't want to die today, because if I don't come back, people who are depending on me to bring back X, Y, and Z will probably die if I don't come back. So, what's the call here? I'm inside somebody else's house. I don't know if there's anybody at home. I think so. I think I've heard a crack upstairs. I don't know. It can be rats, right? It can be anything. It can be soldiers. It can be some innocent person just fending for their lives like you are right now. So do I risk it? Do I run into the kitchen and grab anything I can from the fridge? Do I grab medications I can find? Or do I just turn and go back home? Because if I do, encounter a soldier, or if I do encounter anybody with a gun or a knife or anything like that, and I do die today, I'll take everybody else with me. It's just such an almost impossible question to answer, because even if you remove completely your humanity from the equation, it's still almost no-win scenario, because you know that you are taking supplies from somebody who will also probably very likely die in the next 2 days if you take them. So effectively you are taking somebody else's life because you think that yours or somebody else's in your house is worth it more. And the worst part is, if it's real life, you probably know these people. When the war is over, you will maybe even go to their funeral, and you will be very much the reason they probably have died, amongst others. And yeah, even talking about it doesn't do it justice, right? I don't think somebody talking about that makes that much of a difference. You can talk about this all you want. You can listen to person talk for hours about how war just isn't natural. It's not something that we are supposed to live through. I think a lot of people who went through war could probably tell you that it doesn't feel like I should be talking right now. It doesn't feel like I should be alive. This is like a pathological mental problem a lot of veterans have when they come back from wars. It's that they live out this something that used to be life when they were still there, but then they were deployed, and everybody everybody died but them, right? The whole unit or something, just their friends, people who were literally, quite literally, willing and having to give their life for your friend. Like, that's not something we are supposed to be able to calculate in our brains. It's not supposed to happen. And then you survive it, you come back home, and you don't feel anymore like that's normal. Like, I'm not supposed to be alive. I should have died there. I shouldn't be doing stuff here right now. That's not something that a human brain is designed for. We were definitely never supposed to sort of survive conflicts on scales like this. And especially today, or even it's possible for a huge, massive country invade a small portion, very, very fraction of something, not belonging to anybody, but belonging to itself. And now you are like, oh, there's a tank in front of the grocery store. I don't think I can get bread today. And that's not something you're supposed to understand. That's not something that you're supposed to sort of calculate in your brain. Like, what's the next step now? This is kind of shit, because if I go outside, I'm pretty sure I will just die. On the other hand, if I don't, I will die slower. This is like, it's not just that it's a no-win question. It's no victory is going to be achieved. That's when your brain should turn off and start being in this state of survival. Maybe I don't belong in this situation, but I'm in it. What do I do so that I can wake up tomorrow? And eventually, if you are lucky enough, you will survive long enough, you will do enough inhumane things that this situation will actually go away, and you will be able to go back to your normal life, except that it's just, that doesn't exist, right? That's not a thing anymore. And so that's a conversation that doesn't feel right to be having when you are playing a video game. But this game does it. This game actually, if you will pay attention to it, if you will connect yourself to the game and to the story on the emotional level you need to be at, basically, you will find that at the end of it, when you do survive, the game even shows you like all the things you have done throughout the gameplay, right? You can, like, depends on what you did, your character can go through severe depression over killing people, when obviously it's not something they would normally want to do. And the game kind of points out, well, on day 35, you had to kill this old person because they were threatening to kill you if you don't go away. Unfortunately, you were already holding their medication, their heart medication, right, that they really, really need. So if you just take it, they will probably shoot you. But you do have a gun. And, these meds will obviously save somebody at home. These are like, then the game tells you, so you decided to shoot them, right? And like, that's like games have this, or any fictional content, right? Any movie or show that actually doesn't tell the actual real story that happened. We have unique ability as human beings to sort of actually detach any sort of impact or value, as long as it wasn't real, as long as it was just made up. And I think this game is one of those games where, like, even if all of this is fictional, you need to understand that we had so many wars in our in lifetime of humanity. We had so many wars. We still to this day have so many wars all around the world that it's less likely that the scenario you just went through in that one playthrough didn't happen than that it did. It's very possible that very close to what you did in this entire game was happening to somebody. It was probably happening to a child, maybe 13 years old. They were somehow able to escape 30, uh, 30 times scenarios that should have ended up in their death. They didn't die. 30, 40 times they should have been shot, should have fallen down stairs or, crooked floor, should have died of starvation, but they were lucky enough to find, enemy soldiers that helped them. You have all seen the movies, right? Like, that's kind of like that's the zone of like madness we put ourselves or each other into. It's just, it's so unnatural and it's so awful that it exists. And I think that it's fair to say that this game may not be the best at telling and explaining it, but I do think that it's incredible how much more it helps than it just sits there and does nothing. It has that power, you know. Like I said again, as somebody who spent 100 hours in the game, I feel confident enough to say that. I think if I just had one playthrough of it, maybe I wouldn't feel the same way about it. But the more you complete the stories, the more you sort of understand that uh, when the Ukraine war started, in my country, a lot of people were like questioning why the people who are still in the country, why they are not running away. Um, there are a lot of people from Ukraine in my country that were willingly going back to Ukraine to fight. Um, I don't know if I would be able to make that decision, even if I felt like I need to. And I do think that that was so far the only experience, that the closest experience I had personally to witnessing that this is not something that anybody should ever live to witness or to have to do it themselves, obviously. But the fact that while I was watching this, it's relatively not affecting me in any way. It's not like it's happening to everybody. This kind of thing is happening everywhere, right? Not just Europe, not just Russia, not just Ukraine. Uh, I'm sure it's happening somewhere in America. It's happening somewhere in Africa, Asia, right? Iraq or whatever. Like all over the world, there is conflicts, and 90% of the time, 90% of the casualties are just the bystanders that were born in that village, and now the village is scorched completely. And the worst part is they survived it. Like, how do you... We are not equipped mentally to be able to like process that. We are equipped to survive it, but we are not equipped to live after that. And I think that like playing games like I've played in my day, like a lot of like games like Call of Duty, for example, and I remember the early Call of Duties. I mean, all of them, I guess, are about war to some extent, but the early ones were like the actual like World War, right? And I think that there's so many things, there's so many games, so many stories in games that obviously focus on these times, and the part that just this game does well, and I think that the part that a lot of games like to try for, but not many of them actually do it well, is to show you that just because it's fiction doesn't mean it's not real, and it's that you are not supposed to be able of making decisions like this. Making decision like, do I take something or kill you for it, right? Just because I prefer you to live and me to live and my my parent or my child to live. Unfortunately, only two of us here in this scenario can be alive. So unless I kill myself, I have to kill you. That's a sequence of thoughts that belong to a wild animal, and we have, paradoxically, we have evolved so much that we have completely lost the ability to think that way. So, like I said, instead what happens is that we get into this survival mode where the decision is not, do I think you are worth dying over my child, or even me, or even somebody I love or something. It's not a question. The question is, can I press this trigger faster than you? And that's where the thought ends, because that's the extent of your brain being able to calculate that question. I've enjoyed the game. I think that there is a certain point after you play 100 hours of this game where you will sit there and just kind of maybe think a little bit how science fiction is war to you if you have never seen it before. How ridiculous, how comically bad, right? How cruel, right? Like, how many times did we portray Nazis in games and movies, anything? How many times were you like kind of sitting there watching a movie about like Hitler or Nazis in general and be thinking like, where is the line between how they really were like and how we are showing them? I have seen recently Schindler's List, and it's like, I can believe people are like this, but I don't think, at the same time, I don't seem to understand or grasp the idea that people are just inherently evil. This is not what evil is. This is sort of like narcissistic behavior, this ego of being superior race, right? And it's like, I don't think any human being inherits any sort of hate towards another race, which only proves the fact that we have enslaved a lot of races, including obviously Africans, but there's a lot of other slaves of other nationalities right now in the world, which further proves that hate doesn't really manifest itself in genetic form at all. Because even if we think we are superior to our race in any way, we don't gas them, we don't kill them, we use them. Same way as I'm sure everybody, if you ask them, would say, do you think you are genetically, morally superior to a cow? They will probably say, well, to an animal, yes. Do you feel superior to your dog? Do you feel superior to a cat? I feed them. They would literally die without me. Obviously, why don't you kill them then? Like, that is insane on the face of it. And I think that's how we are supposed to interact with each other and with everything around us. It's like, even if you feel superior towards somebody else or something else, what that really means to you is that it doesn't pose a threat in any level to you, which means that you can either leave it alone or you can use it. That's why slavery existed for so long. Not because we hated them or anybody. I'm saying we. I don't know why, but it's like, hey, one human doesn't hate the other. One human may feel very, very superior to the other, but that only results in what I said. It's like, can use them in some way. We can not pay them, because that's what we do with equals. You are not my equal, I'm not gonna pay you. I will make sure that you survive because I need you as my tool. That's what slavery was. And as much as people may not want to hear this, wars are exclusively about that. Because one force feels superior to somebody or something somewhere. That's how these conflicts are created, there's always one side that feels slightly more superior than the other. If it was equal, I do feel like they would stop fighting eventually. I might be wrong. I'm not, I'm not genius or something, so I'm not saying that's a fact, but it's always this imbalance of thoughts and imbalance of mental states, because everybody, everywhere, nations, individuals always live in this bubble. So if these two kind of mindsets collide, right, one culture collides with the other, conflict can happen very fast. And unfortunately for everybody everywhere, wars are just the tool. That's just the means to communicate that I will use this word, right? I will use the war as an example of my superiority, of my power. And once this war is over, either you prove to me your superiority, or I will defeat you. And the defeat is never in the sense of I will scorch your entire country down so nobody lives on it. Because that's never what wars are. Wars are always about proving superiority and establishing dominance. So in that kind of question, when you are looking at this that way, you are putting another, another set of humans, another country in your crosshair, just to keep them in check. And that's all politics. That's all these egoistic people fighting over land, basically, or rights to it, or something like that. And everybody else is just sitting there like, is there any way we can be spared of the process? And the answer is really never no. In fact, very often you are the utility, you are the proxy to showing your leader that I'm superior to him by killing you, or by, jailing you, bombarding your hospitals. I think it's great that this is a game, because I feel like showing a child a like showing a child a war movie or a show about war, not only many children I think will find it boring, but also I think that games, especially a game like this, is so engaging, like I said, like an extraction shooter, and I think that's engaging for anybody. But this one is like, uh, like I said, stakes and everything, making the rational decision of taking out a gun with you, putting it in your inventory, not putting in your inventory things that you could, because the decision always is, will I put in my inventory the weapon, which means I will not be able to put in my inventory more food. So you're going out with the intention of killing somebody, or at least defending yourself. And all of that combined at its face, like as a game mechanic, as a gameplay mechanic, I think even a child, even a kid could enjoy this game. And before you know it, you will start experiencing these stories, all of these stories of this imaginary war scenarios, and yeah, I think that's why I think I have so much time in this game, because on top of it being a very engaging game, it really made me think about things that I have never realized I really don't want to think about them.